I will introduce you to Jeff Kosis, GSA's Procurement Executive and Deputy Chief Acquisition Officer. Jeff, take it away.
Thank you, Maria. On behalf of the GSA acquisition team, thank you. Thank you for taking time to join this webinar. We've long been committed to healthy and productive industry relationships. We believe that stakeholder and industry engagement is a vital part of our success, and this webinar is part of our ongoing efforts to communicate and to enlist you in ensuring a more effective acquisition system. A system which operates way faster, reduces process steps, reduces costs, and incentivizes the right outcomes. As policymakers, we recognize the need to hear from voices all across the acquisition community, including practitioners, contractors, and stakeholders. So let's talk about today's agenda, because we have several speakers lined up from my office, from GSA's Office of Government-Wide Policy. As the Senior Procurement Executive and voting member of the FAR Council, I'm going to give you a high-level overview of how GSA is approaching two of the most important acquisition-related executive orders of my career. Next, you'll hear from Daniel Briest, the Program Manager for Acquisition.gov. In my remarks, I'm going to explain why Acquisition.gov is an indispensable site for the months ahead, and Daniel is going to show it to you. He'll help you identify where to find all the critical documents, the information, the resources, and the opportunities for you to provide feedback. After Daniel, you'll hear from Polly Hall. Polly is on detail to my office from the Department of Homeland Security, and she's leading what we're calling the Practitioner workstream. After Polly, you'll hear from Nicholas West, head of our Office of GSA Acquisition Policy, Integrity, and Workforce. Nicholas is going to share observations and thoughts about how all this looks from a GSA contracting officer lens. So we're really going to be focusing today on executive orders. The President and his administration have outlined a very clear acquisition agenda. The President's issued over 30 executive orders which impact federal acquisition and/or federal contractors, and at least 4 of those are going to have very major impacts. Today, however, we're going to address the 2 which are going to have the greatest impact on GSA, on our workforce, and on how we go to market. The first executive order that we're going to talk about was issued on March 20th of this year. Formally, it's titled Eliminating Waste and Saving Taxpayer Dollars by Consolidating Procurement. So this executive order, as the name implies, it directed consolidation of procurement of common goods and services in GSA. In doing so, it just greatly expands GSA's role. So here's a key sentence from that executive order, and I want to read this one verbatim. Consolidating domestic federal procurement in the General Services Administration, the agency designed to conduct procurement will eliminate waste and duplication while enabling agencies to focus on their core mission of delivering the best possible services for the American people. So let's linger on the thoughts in those words for a moment. Empowering GSA will eliminate waste and duplication. It will make other agencies more effective. That's a big call out to GSA. It's the biggest I've ever seen. It's a lot of responsibility for GSA and for the rest of federal government. Clearly, that's going to impact you, our industry partners, your go-to-market strategies, your bid, no bid decisions, your pricing, your structure, and more. The executive order gets into our role in federal acquisition. Clearly, that role is expanding. There's several points that I think are worth highlighting across this executive order. And let me start with the section on government-wide contracts for IT products or services, what's commonly called GWACs. Under a 1990s law, any agency that wants to run a GWAC needs to go to OMB, Office of Management and Budget, and ask for approval. That approval is known as an executive agent designation. The executive order directs OMB to name GSA as the executive agent for all GWACs, and it gives GSA further direction that we're to rationalize such contracts. Today, there's 3 agencies that hold such executive agent designations. GSA, of course, NASA, and the National Institutes of Health. NASA and NIH collectively manage 4 GWACs, and they have 3 more under development. Last year, fiscal 2024, the NASA SOUP GWAC had contract obligations of $11.8 billion. Repeat that number, $11.8 billion. The 3 NIH GWACs had obligations of $4.6 billion. These are big, important, impactful vehicles that play a critical role in the marketplace today. When GSA is named executive agent, it will be placed in charge of all the GWACs. And it's going to have to figure out how do we align those with the rest of GSA's offerings. Let me assure you, this has happened before. In the early 2000s, GWACs that were created by the Department of Transportation and the Department of Commerce were consolidated in GSA. They were consolidated in ways that strongly supported small business. GSA is going to have to work with these agencies, with NIH, with NASA, and with OMB. First thing we need to do is understand the state of the current GWACs. We need the insider view of the recompetes. We need to know the commitments made to and by other federal agencies. We need to know the finances of the vehicles, the staffing, the IT infrastructure, the risks, and the benefits in order to be able to map out a sound business strategy. And we need all that information to decide whether to formally accept the executive agent designation that OMB will offer. I think those of you familiar with mergers and acquisition in the commercial sector can at least draw an analogy to the challenge GSA was given. But the GWACs, that's just one paragraph of the Consolidating Procurement Executive Order. To cover the rest of it, I think we need to lightly hit on category management first. During the president's first term, OMB emphasized category management to leverage federal buying power. As they explain it, the federal government should buy as an organized entity, not as thousands of individual buyers. And OMB also emphasizes across the category management principles that we should support small business throughout the process. OMB divided common commercial spending into 10 major categories of spend, and they designated lead agencies for each of those 10 categories. The Consolidation Executive Order uses this construct in the 10 categories of spend. GSA is the lead on 6 of the categories. We lead IT, professional services, travel, industrial products and services, office management, and facilities and construction. The other 4 categories are led by other agencies. The Department of Homeland Security leads the security and protection category. The Department of Defense leads the transportation and logistics category. The Department of Defense and the Department of Veteran Affairs jointly lead the medical category. And finally, the Office of Personnel Management leads the human capital category. For those last 4 categories, for the 4 categories that GSA doesn't lead, what GSA does is build acquisition vehicles when and where the category management sees value and asks us to do so. For example, GSA created a contract vehicle to support the Office of Personnel Management in the human capital category. And we've created a number of contracts to support the Department of Homeland Security in various portions of the security and protection category. On the other hand, where agencies prefer to lead the categories, GSA works with them. For example, we delegated authority to the Department of Defense for them to create and to operate a government-wide contract for small package delivery. That's part of the transportation and logistics category. And GSA updated a delegation to the Department of Veterans Affairs for them to run the federal supply schedules that are directly related to medical and pharmaceutical items, part of the medical category. So that's the 4 categories GSA does not lead. For those 4 categories, again, we create contract vehicles when that's something that the category management lead agency is looking for. For the 6 categories of spend that GSA does lead, we begin with a deep data analysis supported by a range of analytic tools, by extensive engagement with federal agencies, and with a lot of outreach and communication with industry, particularly with small business. What GSA does is map out strategies to reduce costs, both through demand management practices and through the creation of government-wide contract vehicles. To ensure that such contracts are useful all across the federal government, we work to meet a rigorous set of criteria that the Office of Management and Budget established. Contracts that meet all their criteria are awarded the label Best in Class, and such contracts are favored over all other contracts. Today, about 20% of common spend, about $78.2 billion, goes through the GSA category management approved contracts. Per OMB, over the last 4 years, the US government either saved or had a cost avoidance of $60 billion through GSA and other best-in-class contracts. Now, so $60 billion savings with 20% of spend, that raises the question, how much could we save if 30% of spend went through GSA, or 40%, or 50% of common spend? I'd suggest that's the heart of what's at this executive order. But let's now turn to some of the mechanics of it. The executive order set a 60-day window for agencies to submit proposals to GSA for the common products and services they think that we should address. Then it gives GSA another 30 days to turn that into a comprehensive plan and send that plan to OMB, where we'll talk about what, how, and when we'll implement. Our plan has to consider a number of things, and I suggest it starts with our capacity. That's looking at what's our staffing, our financing, and our technology. We're going to have to show potential savings. We're going to have to address how is consolidation going to help agencies better deliver their mission. We're going to have to acknowledge what are the risks to the agencies. We'll have to explain what types of service level agreements we propose and how that's going to ensure success. We're going to have to point what will the financial impacts on GSA be through consolidation, and we're going to have to address how we'll monitor and evaluate our own performance. Because what we're talking about could have a really big impact. I'm confident that OMB is going to thoroughly evaluate our plan, make sure that we've hit all the right topic areas, that we've fully engaged with the federal partners, and that we're in a position to deliver the savings envisioned in the executive order. So the executive order, when you look at next steps, it has a number of process deadlines. I just covered some of those, but it also gives GSA and OMB room to figure out which services we're going to offer and when we're going to start offering them. Those of you who know GSA well recognize we already provide a lot of critical support to agencies. That's the 20% of common spend that I mentioned. Much as we do today, I expect our support to federal partners is going to come through a broad menu, not through a single answer. The menu is likely to include shared services. Shared services were a focus in the president's first term. Today, for example, our federal fleet is a shared service solution. GSA buys and maintains the vehicles making up the fleet, and we lease the vehicles to other federal agencies. I expect you'll see elements of our global supply model. In that model, GSA manages the acquisition of common products, and agencies requisition what they need. By the way, this is one of our most successful small business areas. I expect the creation of new contracts for agency use, building on the record of things such as the Federal Supply Schedules, GSA's GWACs, and OASIS Plus. This is another long-term success area for our small business partners. I expect more assisted acquisition, something GSA has done extremely well in recent years. Finally, I expect there's going to be some transition of acquisition-related functions to GSA. You may have seen in the media some agencies, such as the Office of Personnel Management and the Small Business Administration, have talked about their interest in this model. So just throw a lot at you, and I'm sure you're asking, what does all this mean for industry? Well, to answer that, I suggest first, you need to understand where GSA is going. Today's GSA is a substantially smaller agency with a smaller IT budget and a much larger acquisition mission. We have a new mandate to consolidate acquisition to save those tens of billions of dollars. And that means we're going to be doing business very differently, and will look very different organizationally. GSA will have different priorities, and you should expect us to be shifting resources towards consolidated procurement to be able to deliver on these new priorities. Well, if we're going to shift resources, there's other work we're going to have to de-emphasize, reduce, or stop entirely. We'll also need to significantly improve our market intelligence to better serve federal agencies and to be able to build long-term solutions that expand the industrial base. Those are things we can't do without a lot of industry engagement. We'll need to better recognize where our practices drive costs for you and where we have the opportunity to change some of those practices. That means you should expect us to be asking you for your thoughts, for your ideas, for your answers to some of those questions and queries. Because all this means we need your expertise and your suggestions. It even means, even if we don't remember to ask with a specific acquisition, your input is probably more important there than ever. Okay, everyone, take a breath here, because I just threw a whole lot at you. And I want to give you a minute or two to digest that before we move forward. So I'm going to wrap this section by emphasizing, it's only been a little over 2 months since the consolidation executive order dropped. And in that time, there's been a lot of activity, a lot of analysis, but we're not yet at decisions. We've thought, for example, about what are the attributes of contracts that should be centralized and what are the attributes of contracts that should not be centralized. We've talked to our federal partners in OMB about the GWACs, about common spend, about potential positive and negative impacts. We've collected a lot of inputs, and we're now in the evaluation process. As we examine these points, one of the big things that we've recognized is how critical acquisition reform and acquisition simplification is to carrying out those new responsibilities. So that brings me to the second executive order that we're going to talk about today, the revolutionary FAR overhaul. As with the consolidation executive order, Buckle in, we're going to go in for another dive here. Revolutionary is OFPP's term for the initiative to rewrite the FAR. It's an initiative that's mandated by Executive Order 14275, restoring common sense to federal procurement. The Common Sense Executive Order was issued on Tax Day, April 15th, 2025. We definitely see it as an opportunity to streamline and to simplify the acquisition rules. First off, this executive order is telling us the FAR is too big, too complicated, and it keeps companies from doing business with the US government. It says rewrite the FAR within 180 days by stripping it of non-statutory requirements and please pay attention to this part, and include what's essential to sound procurement. Now, the executive order goes further. It tells us to make the changes now via deviation. In other words, rulemaking has to come later. Now, understand, federal rulemaking requires a notice and comment period, and that will happen, but not until after we've introduced a new skinnied FAR, part by part, through deviations. Third, the executive order also directs agencies, such as GSA, to rewrite their supplements to the FAR. Frankly, it does very little good to rewrite the FAR, but keep all the supplementary policy in place. Let me assure you, GSA does not want to be the agency whose supplement, in our case the GSAM, turns out to be larger than the FAR. Now, of course, rewriting the rules that govern some $700 billion a year in contract spend is complicated. There's not been a fundamental rewrite of the acquisition rules in over 30 years. So there's a lot of interest in it. Witness all of you on the call. And there's a lot of speculation. So let's start off with just a few facts. Let me address some of that speculation. One, yes, it's a very broad executive order. And yes, it's an extremely aggressive timeline. Two, the executive order does not say the FAR will only contain statutory language. What it says is the FAR should contain statutory language plus what's essential to sound procurement. Said another way, the FAR has to include all the basic necessities of federal contracting. These are necessities that may or may not be codified in law. In some cases, Congress has specified a step or a specific part of the acquisition process, and they wouldn't make sense if they were left on their own. To give you one example, when it comes to evaluating past performance, Congress has told us, has put into law, consider timely payment of your subcontractors. And the law says, plus whatever else the FAR Council thinks is important. Now, I suggest it wouldn't make sense to anyone if we evaluate your past performance solely by, did you pay your subcontractors timely? There's other basics, other essentials in past performance, such as performance itself. Did the contractor deliver the right item on time, on budget? Did they follow the contract? Were they good business partners? And so forth. Sharing of data across the government, such as through the integrated award environment, that's another essential. That's another basic necessity of federal contracting. There's clauses and provisions that meet the definition, and we're going to come to that throughout the overhaul. 3, because of that, and despite what you may have read, we are not aiming at a 100-page FAR. We need to preserve the very best of the FAR, and we'll cover that. 4, requirements that stem from active executive orders are not going away. The FAR Council treats executive orders the same way it treats statutes. If Congress, or if the President has given the FAR Council direction, we follow it. If they give us discretion, we exercise it. There's probably many opportunities to review how we've implemented statutes, and there's room for statutes to be updated. There's room for executive orders to be revised or rescinded, and there's a legal work stream addressing those issues. But if a statute's in place that mandates FAR coverage, it's going to be retained. If there's an executive order in place that mandates the FAR Council take action, that will be retained. What the FAR Council will do is look for opportunities to recommend changes to such statutes and or updates, opportunities to revoke or modify such executive orders. So I said, we have to keep the best of the FAR. Let's talk about what that means. If we're going to have a successful rewrite, we need to reflect, why was the FAR created? What problems was it trying to solve? The FAR came out of an earlier commission on procurement reform, which explained that all the different procurement regulations created, and this is a quote, a burdensome mass and maze of procurement regulations with little or no system to coordinate or control the regulations. Key concerns that led to creation of the FAR included proliferation of regulations, a lack of uniformity, concerns about readability, and the need for broad public engagement. We don't want the overhaul to take us back to those problems. So there's several key things we need to preserve. They include one central location for the acquisition community, government, stakeholder, industry, common clauses and representations used by nearly all federal agencies. We need to retain a common vocabulary to enable effective communication. We need to retain common rules of operation. We need to retain safeguards against waste, fraud, and abuse. We need to maintain a shared rulebook. Doing otherwise, that would make the cost of doing business with the US government even more expensive. And such a world would be especially harmful to small businesses. Such a world would reduce the industrial base. GSA recognizes we need to grow and expand the industrial base through both these initiatives. And that's particularly imperative when it comes to the innovative small business community. So to double down, part of the rewrite is keeping the best of today's FAR. So let's talk about the work streams underway. I think a lot of people hear the phrase or the idea, overhaul the FAR, and they immediately think about replacing the rulebook. Let me submit, it's much bigger than that. Think about this as a giant change management initiative with multiple parts. Rewriting the rulebook, that's just one piece. And if that's all we did, it would fail. If the FAR Council was just to go off and change the regulations, our workforce would be lost, industry, especially small business, would be harmed, and we'd miss all kinds of opportunities to optimize. In approaching the rewrite as a change management initiative, I'm going to discuss 4 distinct work streams that are currently underway. And centrally, please note, all 4 are underpinned by the importance of stakeholder and industry engagement. All 4 of them. Workstream 1, that's probably the one you're thinking of. That's all the R's in policy work necessary, the work to read, to research, to review, to re-examine, and to revise regulations. This work stream is led by regulatory writers in GSA, in DoD, and in NASA. For now, you're going to see the output of this work stream and what we're calling master deviations posted on Acquisition.gov. And you'll have the opportunity to offer feedback. Workstream number 2 are the practitioners. This one is all about workforce support. It features the development of strategic acquisition guidance, including companion guides and albums, best practice guides, and this one's all about testing the strategies as they're going live. You'll see the output of this work stream on Acquisition.gov. Daniel and Polly are going to show you where and how to find it. And part of this work stream is going to make transparent, frankly, for the first time, a lot of the resources that we've created for our acquisition workforce. Workstream 3 is the legal work. Again, much of what's in the FAR today is there because Congress directed it through a statute, or a president directed it through an executive order. And some of that is really good stuff, and some of it is dated. Under this work stream, we're working across government on a series of proposals to Congress, proposals that we believe will encourage innovation, that will promote savings and efficiency, that will eliminate mandates from the pre-internet era, that will promote alignment in the acquisition system to ensure consistency between defense and civilian agencies, and that will make technical fixes. We'll also be making recommendations to the White House on executive orders. As our legislative proposals are cleared and transmitted to Congress, we'll make those public. The fourth work stream is technology. Artificial intelligence and emerging technology are remaking just so many parts of the acquisition system, just as they are in so many other areas. We realize the new strategic acquisition guidance has to be powered by advanced technology. And again, you'll be able to see these efforts through Acquisition.gov. GSA recognizes we can't be successful in any of this without healthy outreach, without regular stakeholder engagement. One of our top objectives for today is ensuring you understand how you can participate in this process. We don't want to wait to hear from you until we're into formal rulemaking. In a few minutes, we'll show you where you can find the resources and how you offer us feedback. Even though we're not going to stop and formally address the feedback during this part of the process, we are reading it, and we're considering it as we start to move from deviation to rulemaking. So let's return, though, to the area that's probably of greater interest, that regulatory writers work stream. The FAR rewrite, it's going to move fast. It's going to move through a series of deviations. A lot of process-related instructions are going to be pulled out of the FAR. Today, the words "the contracting officer shall" appears about 1,500 times in the FAR, and the words "the contractor shall" appears nearly as often. Lots of those shalls will go away. And that means our contracting officers are going to be more empowered. It also means more than a few security blankets may disappear. I expect and hope more than one small business is excited at the chance to enter a new market with lower barriers to entry, with less regulations. I also expect more than one of you has concerns about the potential output. You already know today's FAR is going to be replaced by strategic acquisition guidance, made up of a skinny down FAR, still regulatory, and a series of OMB endorsed buying and practitioner guides. The FAR overhaul page on Acquisition.gov is going to be your indispensable resource and your opportunity for feedback. You've seen the first deviation already issued. That was to FAR Part 1. Here, the guiding principles were updated, and now they call it the message Mission First. For the first time, the guiding principles emphasize the value of time as a key attribute. That's a recognition of where and how we actually operate. The guiding principles emphasize buying commercial. That's a theme that's emphasized in another of the President's acquisition-related executive orders, although one we're not covering today. Finally, the new guiding principles call for awards to contractors who show a superior ability to perform. These are big messages, and because these are guiding principles, you're going to see these ideas echo across the new FAR as we seek to enable faster acquisition suitable to the artificial intelligence era. So now, let me bring all this together. It's been a bit over 2 months since the consolidation executive order dropped, and a bit over 6 weeks since the FAR rewrite was issued. Those were thunderbolts for the acquisition system. Within GSA, we see a lot of relationship between the two executive orders, and our goal is to have them reinforce each other as part of building up a more effective acquisition system. The consolidation executive order expands GSA role. It pushes us to save taxpayer dollars and to better support agency missions. It means empowering and untraining and retraining our workforce. It means providing them with better technology and stronger policy support and top cover. The FAR overhaul gives us the opening to simplify processes, to remove low-value process work, and to better empower our workforce. The FAR overhaul creates that opening because it's working towards that strategic acquisition guidance. One of our key objectives is an acquisition system that's more open, more welcoming to those innovative small businesses. And again, none of these activities are things we could or should do on our own. So that's why I want to close out by thanking our stakeholders, our partners, for joining us today. It's imperative that we take this journey together. We're looking to increase your interest in and reduce your cost of contracting with GSA and with the rest of the federal government. So again, thanks for joining us today. So I've plugged the Acquisition.gov site several times over the last half hour. So now let me turn the stage over to Daniel Briest and have him show you the site, what it looks like, how it works. Daniel, all yours.
Thank you, Jeff, and good afternoon, everyone. As Jeff said, my name is Dan Briest, and I am the Program Manager for Acquisition.gov. Today, I'm going to provide you with a brief overview of the revolutionary FAR overhaul pages. Here is the home page of Acquisition.gov that you are all familiar with. Above, you will see the FAR overhaul tab. Click on the tab and it will take you to the FAR overhaul page. Also, as updates are made to the FAR overhaul page, we will be sending out FAR news messages. If you haven't signed up for FAR news messages, click on the link below, provide your email address, and you will start receiving those emails. So now we've navigated to the FAR overhaul pages. If you look on the right block, you're going to see the latest news and announcements. That's where you're going to find the executive order, the fact sheet, the OMB guidance, as well as the FAR console deviation guidance. Next, would you like to provide feedback to OMB for the guidance that they are providing? This is how you contact OFPP to receive or to send the guidance and ask general policy questions. Lastly, on the homepage of the revolutionary FAR overhaul, you can see where you can access the FAR parts and agency deviation pages. As you can see, we are now on the FAR parts and agency deviation pages. In the useful links box, you'll find several tables. These have been removed from the FAR already for the FAR parts that we've already done the rewrite for. This section will grow as we add additional completed parts. Next, each part will have a drop-down menu that provides the agency deviations for those agencies that have provided deviations. To access an individual part, just click on the title of that part, and that's how we navigate to FAR Part 10. So now you've navigated to FAR Part 10, the market research, the rewrite that we've completed. As you can see, each FAR part has much of the same look as the FAR you are used to, including a table of contents. As I'm already receiving questions about the new FAR overhaul pages, I would like to address one simple question that has come up quite a few times. And that is about the applications on Acquisition.gov. We have the Smart Matrix, the Acquisition Regulation Comparator, or even the search engine, which is one of the most used applications on Acquisition.gov. Currently, all the applications, including the search engine, are designed specifically to operate with the FAR and other supplements that are regulatory in nature. I recommend, while looking at the rewrites, that you use the Control F function for searching the FAR overhaul pages. Next, you'll see the feedback box on the right corner, and that's where you can provide feedback to Part 10. Each part will have its own feedback page. Next, let's take a look at the non-regulatory resources. Now, you will hear a little bit more about this from Polly in the very near future. Currently, you can access the Practitioner album on this page. In the future, this is also where you'll be able to find the FAR companion guides. But speaking of the FAR Practitioner and the FAR Practitioner workstream, I'd like to hand this over now to my friend Polly Hall.
Dan, thank you so much, and good afternoon to everybody. Thank you for taking time that I know is valuable to spend learning more about these executive orders and our work implementing them. I'm going to share a little bit about the bridge from policy to practice. I really do view the practitioner workstream of the revolutionary FAR overhaul initiative as that bridge from policy to practice. The practitioner workstream is focused on how the federal acquisition workforce operationalizes the new regulatory framework through the agency-issued deviations in this interim period prior to rulemaking, as the workforce executes their daily work in supporting the delivery of mission for their respective agencies. So while we're working very closely with our policy colleagues as the FAR is rewritten, we are specifically charged with creating what is now being referred to as these non-regulatory resources under the Strategic Acquisition Guidance Framework. And these non-regulatory resources are intended to help guide our federal acquisition workforce through the changes to our acquisition regulation and help them adopt and understand new buying practices that are aligned to the objectives of the executive order, as well as the revised guiding principles in FAR Part 1 that Jeff Kosis mentioned earlier in the session. The OMB memo that the OMB memo on the revolutionary FAR overhaul refers to the FAR and these non-regulatory resources, as I mentioned, as strategic acquisition guidance. So we want to make sure you're hearing that a few times so that you're getting used to that terminology. Under the practitioner albums and buying guides, I know that Dan just pointed to where these are, and I'm going to share a little bit more here in a minute about where they are going to be or are already on Acquisition.gov. But I want to share a little bit more about what these three non-regulatory resources are. So our first practitioner album was just released last week for FAR Part 10. It aligned with the FAR Part 10 deviation or model deviation, for the FAR rewrite. Our practitioners' albums are learning assets for the federal acquisition workforce aligned to each of these deviations as they're issued to help the workforce understand the changes as they happen. Each practitioner album is going to have two things that I know you as our industry partners are really interested in, and one is a change summary. What changes happened? What came out of the FAR? And if it came out, did it go away or did it go into these non-regulatory resources, right? So the changes that occurred as the FAR was rewritten for that specific FAR part is going to be in the practitioner album under change summary. And then we also have a section which is the line out. So I'm going to point us to those in a moment, but the practitioners' albums will always have those two learning assets for our community. They also will have existing and relevant tools and resources, and maybe new or augmented training or information that helps our workforce navigate these changes as we go along this journey. And as Jeff Kosis mentioned, we are publicly sharing these practitioners' album or these learning assets with the public on the FAR overhaul website on act.gov so that industry and other stakeholders have a shared and mutual understanding of the changes in implementation as we're explaining them to our acquisition community and workforce inside of government. because we know that the changes and the volume of the changes are rather significant, especially as we go far part through this process. We want to make sure that we're providing you as much familiarity as we can to what we're sharing with our community, so that when you see it in future solicitations and resultant contract awards, right, these changes, you are learning with our community as we go together through this journey. In addition to the practitioner albums, we are creating two different guides. One is the FAR Companion Guide, and this is not available yet. It is still in development, but it will be aligned to the FAR parts and designed to help operationalize the new FAR and strengthen adoption of what we have proven out to be some best practices for acquisition. So it's aptly named Companion Guide. This Companion Guide is intended to go hand in hand with the FAR. But we're also working on content for a category buying guide that will definitively, right, our goal here is to enable it with technology that will help our workforce efficiently navigate the buying pathways as aligned to category management. And you can see here some of that interrelationship between where we've been asked to go with consolidation and category management and commercial and existing vehicles, but also the interconnectivity to that work stream to our FAR overhaul and our FAR rewrite. So these three resources, one available now and to be made available with each subsequent FAR part rewrite, our practitioner's album, and two forthcoming, all three of these will be available on Acquisition.gov. And so I wanted to just kind of point you a little bit more closely to where they are on the next slide. So as Dan shared, when you go into the FAR Part 10 deviation, there's that box now for the non-regulatory resources. And our practitioner album for FAR Part 10 is right there, and the link is active. You'll see that underneath the link to the practitioner album, there's a link to the FAR Companion Guide. And that's the guide I mentioned before that will be the kind of compendium guide with the FAR, and that will be forthcoming here in the coming, we hope, weeks for you to start to get under the hood on with us and read and provide us feedback on. So if you click on the practitioner album, you'll go to this screen, and I want to just kind of walk you through a few things. One is that change summary that I mentioned and the line out summary that I mentioned that will be available for all FAR parts are now residing here in the practitioner albums. But also we have the supplemental resources, and below the line out, these resources will vary by different parts of the FAR that we are preparing the practitioner album for. Again, curating existing appropriate resources and what we're calling smart accelerators to help our workforce adopt the new regulatory framework and resources available to them that are non-regulatory in nature. But then again, augmenting what exists with new learning, be they a blog, a podcast, a webinar, right? Those will also be housed here in our associated practitioner album, and again, shared publicly so that industry can learn along with our federal acquisition community. Now, I know Dan covered where to go to the model deviation. I want to point you to the line out in our practitioner albums. This line out document is what came out of the FAR, right? These are what is no longer going to be found in the FAR, but the line out is intended to be read with the model deviation, right, with that associated FAR part rewrite. And we've seen instances of where the line out has been shared absent the FAR rewrite. And we want to make sure that we're sharing that they should be read in tandem. The line out helps understand what came out, and then you can navigate through that change summary above it, right, where that content might have gone. But the model deviation, the rewrite, is really what needs to be read and understood, because that is what our workforce will now be implementing in their daily work as they execute the business of government through the procurement process. So please, we just wanted to call this out so that you paid attention to reading those two pieces in conjunction with each other. And then I just wanted to point on the main page of the FAR overhaul Acquisition.gov website, where the category buying guide content and hopefully eventually the solution that is technology enabled will reside in the forthcoming months here. That might be rechanged from buying guide to category guide, but that is where you'll find the content for the category guide once it's released. So really wanted to kind of make sure you had the walkthrough there. And I now just want to take a moment to discuss a little bit about the testing and sharing framework that we are also providing to our federal acquisition community. We know that the acquisition community will need support as we adopt these model deviations, these FAR rewrites across the agencies. And basically, as we enter this period where we are operating by the agency deviations prior to rulemaking, we view this as a phenomenal opportunity to test the framework in practice before we refine it and move it through into the rulemaking process. So I truly view this as a phenomenal opportunity to collectively test our framework for a period of time before we formalize it. So what is testing? Testing to us means applying the RFO in practice, right? The FAR deviations, the rewrites for GSA. We've already posted the GSA deviations, but the other agencies will be posting theirs, and this new non-regulatory resources that are being created. And recognizing that as we remove some shalls and provide some more discretion to our contracting officers and acquisition teams, new novel acquisition methods might be realized, and it provides an opportunity to test those as well. So we will be providing support, coaching support to our acquisition workforce across the federal government. That support will be by experienced acquisition innovation professionals from GSA that we have here on detail, but also from agency acquisition innovation labs and agency acquisition innovation advocates and other experienced contracting professionals that we know have tested some of these practices already through the flexibility that existed in the FAR to date. So coaching support, I think, is going to be a really important link for our community to test this. And we are building in feedback and sharing loops so that we are learning from our operalization of the rewrite in this interim period. And as I said, so that we can make adjustments prior to rulemaking and finalization of our non-regulatory resources as well, based on those experiences. So to me, this is an extremely important time for partnering across our acquisition community and with industry and learning together as we implement these new buying practices. So to that end, I just want to say that I ask you a few things. First of all, we really are going to be doing a lot, and as Jeff said, really rapidly. So I just want to ask you to have some patience with our acquisition teams as they go through this process. And if things look different and you have questions and perhaps even some concerns, share those first with your contracting officer, and then share them through the variety of feedback mechanisms that we've discussed today. We want to make sure that things are clear and understood, so engage with us. But again, this is a truly collective journey that we're on together. I'm really excited about our opportunity to test this out and iterate and get it right. So thanks in advance for your patience and that thoughtful engagement. And I'm excited to turn it over to Nick West now to share a little bit more about GSA's specific implementation of the RFO. Thanks so much. Nick, over to you.
Thanks, Polly. First, quick reminder on the basic steps outlined in the OMB implementing instructions that Jeff covered earlier for a little bit of context. The OMB instructions basically say that after the model FAR language is posted, agencies are to generally issue deviations within 30 days to implement the model FAR language. So that's what I'm here to talk about. I'm here to talk about how GSA intends to follow the OMB guidance, and that we will likely be one of the first ones out of the gate on each of these deviations. So it will be helpful to follow along. Our goal with our deviations is to help our workforce in plain language understand basically two things. These are the two primary goals. One, to understand the major process changes that they're authorized to do, or more likely don't have to do. And two, to understand the changes and the provisions and clauses. Most likely it'll be that they don't have to include certain provisions and clauses and solicitations and contracts anymore. We'll also be reviewing the GSAM, which is our FAR supplement, for conflicts with the new FAR policy, and updating that as needed. Finally, we recognize that this is a whole lot of policy change at one time for our workforce. So in addition to the testing that Polly and her team are going to be doing, we're standing up some new training on specific policy topics for our acquisition workforce. This will hopefully enable us to address some of the common process challenges that folks are having, where policy may not be the most effective solution. I'm sure Poly will be a very effective solution. So now what I think might be the most helpful is if we walk you through what one of our deviations looks like section by section, and I'll explain the type of information you should expect to see and why it matters. We'll use the Part 1 deviation as an example, since it's already available on Acquisition.gov. Dan showed you how to get to the different FAR parts, and under Part 1, it's agency deviations, and you'll see that GSA has ours posted there. So starting with the numbering system at the top, we've created a new document type that aligns to the relevant FAR part where the deviation is being authorized. So it's the RFO followed by the FAR part to allow you to understand which FAR part we're really talking about for this individual document. The key information I'll point out on the header is to whom the memo is addressed, which is GSA contracting activities. So this means we're authorizing GSA contracting officers to use the new language. Of course, GSA doesn't have authority to deviate for other agencies, just ourselves. The purpose section and the top of the background section are likely to be pretty standard, giving a quick overview of the RFO initiative. But once we get past the boilerplate language, we'll start to get into the summary of changes. This is where we give the really high-level description of what's retained and what's removed. So the goal is to help us refer back to relevant statutes that are driving what stayed in the FAR, and give us a quick snapshot of the high-level items that were removed. The tools that Polly showed you will have a lot of the same information, or maybe in different formats, recognizing we all kind of learn differently based on the way the information is presented. And just a note that this is not all-encompassing. It's just a high-level description of the changes. But the next section is the instructions. So this is where we're going to tell the workforce to use the new FAR language going forward. Part 1 isn't the best example for clause and provision instructions, since there are no instructions, well, there are no clauses and provisions in Part 1 in general, but if there were changes to clauses and provisions, this is where you would expect to see the instructions on how to deal with those on existing contracts. In general, we plan to give our workforce flexibility. So other than the long-term indefinite delivery vehicles like the schedules and the GWACs, we're not requiring our COs to go back and modify existing contracts to remove those clauses. But this is my ask of you. If there are specific clauses that are no longer required in the new FAR language, but they are in your contract, and they can save the government money, bring this to your contracting officer's attention. We're not asking them to go back and modify all contracts, because we don't want to drive up administrative costs for unnecessary administrative modifications, but we do want to eliminate the burdensome requirements that aren't driving value. So that's the whole point of this initiative. So we need your help there. The next few sections in the document are pretty standard. Paragraph 4 drives home that this deviation is only applicable to GSA. Paragraph 5 cites the relevant authorities. 6, the effective date. And then finally, we have the internal mailbox to answer any of the questions from our workforce, as I'm sure there will be many. So to summarize, 3 key takeaways for you. 1, the GSA deviation authorizes our contracting officers to use the new FAR language. 2, our COs have flexibility to incorporate the new changes into existing contracts. And then 3, and I would say most important, if there are burdensome requirements you see that have been removed from the FAR that you would like to see incorporated into your existing contract, let your CO know. We all know that contract changes are negotiable. So I urge you to have something to offer in return, so it's a win-win. But we're looking for these changes to have an impact, and we'll need your input along the way. Speaking of your input, I'll turn it back over to Maria to get the Q&A session started.
All right, thank you so much, Nick. And thank you, Jeff, Dan, Polly, and Nick again for those informative presentations. We're a little bit ahead of schedule, which never happens, so I hope I don't jinx myself, but that means we have more time for the questions, and that's where we are on the agenda. We're at the Q&A section. And so, as I said in the beginning, there are thousands of you registered for this webinar, and there are actually thousands of you on the webinar. And so that means we got a lot of questions, and we will not have time to answer all of them, but we will do our best to answer as many questions as possible. We have seen the questions you put in the Q&A, and we will be addressing some of them as we see some common themes coming out. And so with that, I'm going to bring our panelists in, and we'll get this section started. And I think the first question I have is for Polly. And Polly, I know you touched on this a little bit during your presentation, but this seems to be a common question. So that question is, when exactly will the companion guides and the category buying guides be available?
So the companion guide and then the category guide are still being created. We are just working through with our policy partners and OFPP, finalization of content. We started a little bit later than our policy colleagues. They are going to be released gradually. The category guide is iterative drafts for validation, and the FAR companion guide will be released FAR section by FAR section, and we'll make up for the FAR parts that are already released and catch up with those. I don't have a definitive date yet for everybody, but as Dan mentioned, if you sign up for the FAR news, you will be notified of changes to the RFO page, including when content for those guides are available.
All right, thanks, Polly. All right, so the next question is on contract consolidation. So this one is for Jeff. Jeff, will GSA be canceling the NASA SOUP solicitation and starting all over again?
No, we're not going to cancel the solicitation and start all over again. What we're going to do is meet with NASA, meet with the NIH, understand what's going on with the vehicles, what are the benefits, what are the issues, what are the opportunities, what are the finances, and then we will put together our long-term strategy. The executive order tells us to rationalize the vehicles. We'll figure out the best approach to doing that. Don't know how we're going to rationalize today, but to cancel and start over would be completely inefficient and counter to all the direction of the administration.
Thanks, Jeff. All right, Dan, the next one's going to be for you. And this question is Acquisition.gov replacing SAM.gov?
That would be no. We are definitely not replacing SAM.gov. Acquisition.gov was set up for the regulations and applications to help industry and the workforce access the regulations. That will remain our job for now.
All right, thank you so much. Nick, I'm going to shoot you this next question. Which version of the FAR will agencies use during the transition?
Well, I can speak for GSA here. GSA will be using both the current and the new model deviations during the transition. We'll be telling our contracting teams how to do that. will be directing the application. Buying guides, the tools, the resources like the innovation coaches and the agency adoption model text that OFPP and the FAR Council are issuing. That's going to promote the consistent application of the new policies government-wide.
Thanks, Nick. All right, Jeff, I'm going to have a series of questions for you next because they're all under the contract consolidation topic. So, all right, so here's the next question. Will all procurement through GSA be through either a GWAC, MAC, or mass schedules? More specifically, will standalone contract opportunities still be pursued via SAM.gov, or will the opportunities only be available to companies on existing contract vehicles? And if you need me to repeat the question, just say so.
I've got it, thank you.
Okay.
So it was a multi-part question, but I'm going to change the order. Our federal supply schedules are continually open for new offers. We are always looking for innovative new companies to come in and offer solutions. Our GWACs, our MACs, or other vehicles have periodic on-ramps and opportunities to bring in new entrants. So that will always be part of our portfolio. In no way will everything be through the vehicle. Our view is if a government-wide solution has been built, we should be using it. If it has not been built and it doesn't fit every situation, then we would still use standalone contracts. We want our workforce to be able to use every tool that makes sense, but we also want to maximize the value of best-in-class contracts. So where it's possible to use a schedule, a GWAC, or best-in-class contract, that will be the first place we'll look. If that's not the right answer, then we may well end up creating new contracts.
Thanks, Jeff. All right, here's another contract consolidation question. With the contract consolidation initiative, how will GSA schedule contracts with low sales be addressed? And part two is, much of our work is currently done at individual agents levels. Can we retain or schedule contract in light of this transition?
The scheduled contracts contain a minimum sales criteria clause. During the pandemic, GSA had stopped enforcing that clause as part of its outreach efforts. More recently, GSA announced that we were going to fully enforce the clause. You should expect that going forward. We're creating the contract vehicles, the schedules, with the expectation that there's a significant government-wide need that's being met through the contracts. If there is not such a need being met, we are not going to be in a position to manage and maintain those contracts, and instead we'll focus our workforce on things that provide our greatest savings to the taxpayer.
All right, thanks, Jeff. All right, Nick, you're up next. So this one says, I've heard the terms master deviation, model deviation, and GSA deviation. What's the difference?
So the master deviation and model deviation and FAR deviation, all those are the same thing. That's the document that it's called the FAR rewrite language. It's prepared by the FAR Council, posted to Acquisition.gov for agencies to adopt. The agencies then authorize their workforce to use that language. And so in GSA's case, that would be the GSA deviation. So that's what the GSA deviation is. And you want to mute.
Thanks. I'm going to stay on you for a little bit. This one is a mass schedule question, or if Jeff, whoever can answer it will, but I think you can. It says, does GSA anticipate changes to the mass schedule solicitation to align with these changes?
Yeah. So I think mass solicitation's updated periodically all the time to reflect policy changes. So this wouldn't be any different. I think our industry partners are familiar with how the solicitation refreshes work. That's what we call them when we update the solicitation. We post plan changes on interact.gsa.gov for a period of time to get feedback. Then we update the solicitation. Often that's followed by a mass modification for those existing contractors to update the terms and conditions, and then they accept it through a defined process.
Thanks, Nick. I'm going to give you a break and go back to Jeff. Jeff, why is important in material being eliminated from the FAR?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question. Why is what being eliminated?
It says, why is important material being eliminated from the FAR?
Okay. So the executive order tells us to strip the FAR to the statutory plus material that's essential for procurement. In many cases, there's helpful and good guidance. There's information on process steps. There's a lot of repetition within the FAR. So where material is important, but perhaps it outlines a process step or a way to do something, that's not regulatory. So that material may be better housed in a buying guide, in a practitioner guide, in a link, somewhere else. Living in an electronic world, we want to have the FAR focus on truly regulatory material, what we have to do, not how we have to do it. We want to fully empower the workforce to figure out the best way to accomplish those objectives. And in giving them that material, taking away regulatory how-to language makes it simpler and hopefully reduces costs in the process.
All right, thanks, Jeff. I'm going to stay on you for a little bit too. Another question.
Sure.
With the contract consolidation initiative, how will GSA schedule contracts with, oh no, I did ask this question before, sorry. So no, let's see. All right. Okay, what is the FAR Council's plan in asking industry for feedback? Is there a timeline and venue method to collect feedback? And I know we touched on this a little bit, it bears going over, yeah.
Right. So with each future deviation, we are going to invite feedback that will generally be for a 45-day window. Dan showed everyone where and how that feedback mechanism exists. We're regularly reading the feedback. Again, we're not going to formally respond to the feedback in this stage. We're reading it, we're having conversations that may influence some of the other material, and it will certainly influence us when we move to the rulemaking stage. But again, each FAR part will have a 45-day feedback period as the standard.
Thank you. Polly, I'm going to go back to you. And this question says, will each agency have its own buying guide, or will there be one that all agencies follow?
Great question. I think, as we explained, strategic acquisition guidance is now a term that's been introduced into our federal acquisition language, and that is the FAR plus these federal buying guides, which are at the level of the Office of Federal Procurement Policy and the FAR Council. So the guides that are being created as buying guides are intended to be government-wide. Now, the EO and the OMB memo associated with the executive order for the revolutionary FAR overhaul does require agencies to revisit their agency supplements and to ensure that agency supplements align with the EO and new FAR, right? So we anticipate, though there's no specific direction, that agencies might also revisit their existing job aids and other guidance and may augment guidance to their workforce to ensure their workforce understands our new SAG framework and new operating ecosystem here. So I think we might see guidance at the agency level, but that is not under our direct purview.
Thanks, Polly. Nick, next is for you. And this one says, have you given a presentation similar to the one you're given today to the GSA acquisition workforce?
Yes, we have. We did a very similar presentation, but obviously said different things. So let's cover the same topics just last week. So they're prepped, eager to test out these new authorities, very much aware of all the things that we're doing.
Okay. All right, thanks, Nick. And Jeff, back to you. When will formal rulemaking begin?
After we have completed all of the deviations, assessed the results, and had the chance to submit any recommendations for changes to statutes and to executive orders.
Thank you, thank you. All right, Polly, back to you. Do buying guides replace agency supplements?
Short answer is no, they do not. The buying guides are part of the non-regulatory resources that complement the FAR, our Federal Acquisition Regulation, and certainly should then complement the agency supplements. So the answer is no. Think of them as opportunities for us to share best practices and to provide some areas where there is discretion and flexibility for the acquisition team and the contracting officer.
All right. So just one last follow-on question to that, Polly. Do buying guides have the force and effect of law?
These buying guides are non-regulatory resources, so they are distinct and different from regulations, policy, or law.
All right. Well, guess what? I don't see any more questions. So that means our group did a fantastic job explaining everything. I hope you understand everything, and that means, but I know you will have plenty more questions. But thank you so much for the panel. Thanks again to Stephen, Josh, Jeff, Dan, Nick, and Polly for all your remarks, presentations, and the question and answer session. This is a work in progress, and although we do not have all the answers at this point, our hope is that it helped you to understand a little bit more about the contracts consolidation and the FAR overhaul initiatives. So here are some key takeaways to keep in mind. I know the question was asked as whether or not the recording will be posted. No, it won't be posted. It's for GSA's internal use only. However, the slides will be posted on the GSA Acquisition Policy Library webpage under the RFO tab. And I think the link for that webpage just got dropped in the chat. So look for them about the end of this week. Could be as early as tomorrow, but by the end of this week. So there you have that. Remember that the Acquisition.gov website is a place to go for anything related to the FAR overhaul, including the FAR parts, buying guides, and agency deviations. And remember, as Dan said, click the sign up for the FAR news link to get notified when there have been new parts or buying guides posted. That will be your official notification method. And finally, we are just asking for your feedback. It was very clear today that we value your industry and our partners and that we crave your feedback. And so go to the feedback section for the FAR parts and the companion buying guides once they're released and submit your feedback by the deadlines. They will be taken into consideration. And so to close out, I want to say a big thank you to your audience for participating. We appreciate your partnership with us. You are too numerous to name, but I also cannot thank my GSA colleagues enough for the collaboration and support in putting together this webinar. A special thank you to the behind-the-scenes monitors of this event. Thank you again, and have a pleasant rest of the afternoon. Goodbye.